While there is already a huge amount of data available online, some media organizations are going one step further by getting their readers involved in the process of collecting and analyzing data. Crowdsourcing has become a common practice in the world of data journalism, and The Guardian is now considered as a reference in the field. The Guardian's data blog won the 2011 Newspaper Awards Prize for Best Use of New Media, and The Guardian's data store was honored at the Knight Batten Awards for Innovation in Journalism in 2011. We went to The Guardian's offices in London to talk to their data journalism team about data crowdsourcing and the different projects they have recently set up. Simon Rogers is the editor of the data blog. He told us how crowdsourcing can help when other ways of collecting and analysing data are not enough.
I suppose the thing about crowdsourcing is just when you've got tons of stuff to go through, like say with the MP's expensive, you have 450,000 pages to go through, that's impossible for one person to do. And also, when you've got a lot of this stuff that's in a really inaccessible, bad format, that is where really crowdsourcing can help. Because, one thing the government's got is lots of readers, lots of payers' eyes, and especially if something is interesting to them, then it can really work. So say when we did MP's expenses, we had 450,000 documents, a lot of documents. We had very little time to do anything in, and it's what better way than to kind of open it up to readership. But what we found, I think, with MP's expenses is that what it really generated was tip-offs and stories more than data in that instance. So although it was kind of remarkably successful in terms of traffic, people really liked it. In terms of kind of the actual raw data, it was hard because we couldn't know what we can trust. We're doing something that have been much more successful, and we're doing something at the moment with Mixmag on drug use, and that's been phenomenally successful. That looks like it's going to be bigger than the British Crime Survey in terms of the number of people that come back, which is brilliant. I think what those things have in common, I guess, is people care about them, so they're willing to spend the time. Because a lot of the crowdsourcing we've done is kind of almost relies on the obsessives. So with MP's expenses, it's got a massive amount of traffic at the beginning, and it really died down. But what you still get are people who are obsessively going through every page looking for that story. One person's done a lot of 30,000 pages. That one person has done 30,000 pages, so they know a lot of stuff. So in terms of generating stories, it worked really well, and it was a profile thing. It worked brilliantly, and people really liked it. It made the Guardian look good, which matters. But I think in terms of generating raw data, not so much. And then when we did it with the Serapanian papers, that was again kind of quite a good way of looking for stories, scouring the raw information for stories. But it also seems to me that there's some of the ones that we've done that have worked really well have been more like old-fashioned surveys. So it's like when you're asking people about their experiences, about their life, about what they've done. They work really well because people aren't necessarily going to make it up. People are going to say what they feel. And where we've asked people to kind of do our job for us, we're going through stuff. You have to have something that people really care about, and you have to have a kind of framework of people to produce the data in a way you can trust it.
And so you were talking about reliability earlier. How do you deal with that on a daily basis? How do you trust people to contribute?
Yeah, well, that's where I think the approach that Old Weather have got, where they get 10 people to do each one, is a really good test on that. It's an old-fashioned kind of computer science technique to get more than one person to enter data. I think that is a really good way to do it. I think certainly with the MP's expenses thing, we try to minimise the risk of MPs going on and editing their own records to make themselves look better, but you can't permanently guard against that. You can just look out for certain URLs or what's coming from the SW1 area of London or whatever. So that's a bit trickier, and that's where I kind of fell down a bit, because I felt like the data we were getting out of that wasn't reliable enough, even though the stories were great and the uptake was great. It wasn't producing kind of raw numbers that we could kind of confidently use.
Could you give a piece of advice to journalists who want to use crowdsourcing to collect data online? What advice would you give?
I would say the most important things are to make it, if it's not something personal to people, if it's something personal to people, that really helps. Otherwise, make something that people really care about, or are going to care about, have a long time. So even after the news dies down, what people are going to really matter to them. They're going to want to get involved with. And also, the other thing that's really worked for us is when you make it more like a game. So the second time around we did MP's expenses, it was much more like a game. We had individual tasks for people to do. We said, can you do the cabinet or the shadow cabinet or this or that? And that really, really helped, because it gave people specific tasks and things to do. And that made a big, big difference. Because I think if you just present people with a wodge of information they have to plough through, it's like work. It's too much like hard work, that's what we get paid for. So I think making it fun for people to do is really important.
In October 2011, the Data blog set up a crowdsourced map of the Occupy movement. Asking people to map where protests were taking place around the world, the Guardian data team managed to get hundreds of contributors and over 6,000 Facebook shares by simply using a Google form. The result is a very straightforward map of the Occupy movement worldwide, which is still being updated today. The Guardian's data journalism team has done many of these projects in the past few years. Each of them proved to be very successful. So we asked them for tips on how to use crowdsourcing in data journalism, and we asked data journalist James Ball to tell us about the Guardian's most successful crowdsourcing projects.
I think the one that got the biggest response was something that we did on Olympic ticketing. Thousands of people in the UK tried to get tickets for next year's Olympics, and there was a lot of sort of fury that people hadn't got them. People had ordered hundreds of pounds worth and been told they'd get nothing. But no one really knew if it was just that, you know, some people were complaining quite loudly and actually most people were happy. And so we tried to work out a way to find out. We decided the best thing we could really do, in the lack of any good data, was to ask people. And we thought we'd have to treat it as quite a light thing because it's not a balanced sample and this sort of thing. But we created a Google form and asked very, very specific questions. It was actually quite a long form, and it asked how much in value people had ordered of tickets, how much their card had been debited for, which events they went for, this kind of thing. And we put it up as a sort of small picture on the front of the site, but it was just shared around really rapidly. I think this is one of the key things. You can't just think, what do I want to know for my story? You've got to think, what are people wanting to tell me right now? And it's only when you tap into what are people wanting to talk about that crowdsourcing is going to be successful. But the volume of responses on this, which was one of the earliest times we'd ever tried to do this approach, was huge. We had 1,000 responses in less than an hour and 7,000 by the end of that day. And so obviously we started to take presenting the results a bit more seriously at this point because we'd essentially had no idea how well it would do. And so we put on some caveats, you know, Guardian readers might be more wealthy than other people. Also, people who got less than they expected might be more willing to sort of talk to us. So we didn't know how much value the results would have. So we did that and cut it down, and we had a good 7,000 records to base it on, and we found, you know, about half the people who'd asked for tickets had got nothing, how many tickets people had ordered and got, and we ran all of this stuff. And obviously, because so many people had taken part the day before, there was a lot of interest in the results. A few weeks later, the official summary report came out, and our numbers were shockingly close. They were almost exactly on there. I think partly through luck, but also I think because we've got just so many people. But yes, I mean, generally though, I tend to find crowdsourcing is more useful for the context around the data story, or for getting people to follow one up. So if we publish a story based on data that we do internally, and I do quite a lot of work on lobbying, I publish the full register or the whole thing that I based it on, because sometimes you'll get someone who doesn't like a particular MP or Lord will say, oh, that researcher doesn't declare anything, but I know they work for here. Now you'll often get that as an email rather than on your open tools that you would usually use, but that's fine. You know, it's all about learning how to follow up. So while it's less frequent that it helps you compile data, it often lets you do more with the data than you could yourself. You can only know so many people.
Can you talk to me through the process of processing all the data that you collect? You had about 7,000 responses. How did you deal with this huge amount of data?
So we'd preempted that we'd want to do analysis on it, which helps. If you start something in a comment thread, it's often too late to then turn it into a usable way. So you have to set out at the start and think, what's the best tool for what I want to know? Is it a comment thread? Is it building an app? And if it's building an app, you have to think, is this worth the wait? And is it worth the resource to do it? In this case, we thought of Google Forms. And if someone fills that out, it turns into a row on a spreadsheet. And so it meant that straight away, even while it was still updating, I could open the spreadsheet and see all of the results. So I actually could have tried to do the work in Google, but I downloaded it into Microsoft Excel and then did things like sort it from low to high and found the people who decided to write in instead of put digits on how much they spent and fixed all of those. I decided not to exclude as little as I could. So rather than just taking valid response, I tried to fix other ones. People had used foreign currencies, so I converted them into sterling, all of which was a bit painstaking. But I mean, the whole analysis was done in a few hours. Then knocked out the obviously silly entries. A lot of people decided to fill it out, pointing out they'd spent nothing on tickets. It's kind of like a bit facetious, but fine. I mean, that was less than 100, which out of 7,000, several hundred was nothing. And then a few dozen who'd just put in obviously fake high amounts trying to distort it. I'm talking things like 10 million there. I wasn't jumping to assumptions. And so that left me with a set that I could then easily use the normal data principles we use every day. I did what's called a pivot table. I did some averaging, that kind of thing. So because we'd planned it ahead, it meant it was quite simple. If we'd have stumbled into it just through a comments thread or something, it would have been harder. I think it sort of showed the value of thinking about what you might do with the results of crowdsourcing in advance.
And so, well, there was lots of manual work then to sort out all the data. How many people did you have on this to try and just yourself?
Well,
Okay.
we'd not really had any idea it would get the momentum it would. So I worked with the sports blog editor. We sort of put our heads together and thought this might be a fun project. And so we did it start to finish in 24 hours.
Wow.
You know, we had the idea, we put something up that lunchtime, we put it on the front of the site. When we saw it was proving quite popular, we kept it on the front of the site for the rest of the day, and then we presented the results online the next morning.
And what made you choose Google Doc for this compared to other poll or survey tools that are available online?
It's because it gives complete control over the results. I don't have to use anyone else's analytic tools, and I can pull it easily into either database software or into spreadsheets, which was enough for that job. When you start to use specialist polling software, you're often going through their tools and their restrictions. I think if the information we'd have been asking for was particularly sensitive, I might have hesitated before using Google and thought about trying to do something in-house. But generally, just the ease of dropping a Google form into a Guardian page, and it's virtually invisible to the user that we're using one, is, you know, just so convenient. It's always convenience that makes us do this.
And so what advice would you give to other journalists who want to give a go to data crowdsourcing in terms of, you know, what questions to ask the audience or how to tackle the subject?
You have to have very specific things you want to know, and as much as possible, ask things that get multi-choice responses. Try and get some basic demographics of who you're talking to, so you can see if your sample's even roughly, you know, how it might be biased. Generally, as I say, it's better for processing than for collecting. If you're asking for amounts and things like this, as we were, try and, in the guidance, specify that it's in digits, that they use a specific currency, anything like that. A lot won't. But the more you hold their hand through, the better. And always put on a comment box. So, because a lot of people will fill out the other things, but what they really want is to give you their opinion or their story, especially on something where it's a consumer story or an outrage. And actually, you might only be interested in a few of the controlled fields. But as long as they've got a chance to comment, and as long as you use and reflect some of the interesting ones, you get a much greater degree of response than people just feeling like you're restricting them to what you want to know.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.